Immigrants to first world countries from third world. How many of you thought I'll work for a few years and go back to my country to do something there but have changed your minds now, and why? I became good friends with an African refugee. At first, he was going to go back as soon as his country stabilized and was safe again. I just asked him a few days ago and he said he isn't going back. It's like others said, even at minimum wage, you can meet your basic needs. There are laws and everybody follows them. There are plenty of jobs and places to live available. Access to medical care. The list goes on. There is also a decent sized community here of people from his tribe, as he calls them. They all speak his native language. Even at minimum wage, you can meet your basic needs. I think it's interesting. Not wrong. Not right. Just interesting. How different people feel about what basic needs are and whether or not minimum wage can meet them. Like dude from Africa is, wow, minimum wage is enough. Dude from the suburbs is like, I can't possibly live on minimum wage. I need $15 an hour at least. Moved from South Africa to Ireland. Thought I'd just save up and go back with euros. Medical healthcare in ZA is crap for obvious reasons. One day I tore my retina playing rugby, went for emergency surgery. That day, no wait. I was terrified of the bill and told the doctor. He asked if I work and pay tax. I said yes. He responded, oh then it's free. You just have to pay for the use of the bed overnight. 75 euros. It'll never go back. That's too unbelievable. My mom came to the US to get a master's degree and planned to return after that. During the master's program she met my dad, then had 2 kids, got her PhD, and is now a tenured professor. It's been 25 years and she became a US citizen a few weeks ago. She plans to return in 4 years. My parents moved to the States from Mexico in early 90s. The idea was to work for a few years and then go back to Mexico. My mom fell in love with the quality of life, even at minimum wage, working 70+ hour weeks, temp agencies, Burger King, factories, etc. My dad had been in the US since the 80s and thanks to Reagan, he had residency in 85 but never wanted to do anything with it since he wanted to move back to Mexico. Mom said heck no, got some legal advice from a church, and the whole family was able to legalize. We're all citizens now. Perhaps I can give some perspective as someone who went to a first world country for university and has returned back home now. Life has always been decent for me. I'd say by US economic standards I've lived an upper middle class lifestyle. That is, I have no student debt and attended private schools and universities my whole life. I'm also one of 5 children and I've never really had to struggle to make ends meet. Having said that, I returned back home and it's taking a tremendous amount out of me not to leave again. It's just so hard when you've lived such a comfortable lifestyle where people from all over the world live in an area and hold shared values, and you go back to a country still developing. I come from a country still burdened by petty issues like tribalism and stuff. I prefer the Western mentality where individualism is superior to the group mentality. Although I make good money, every bloody day is a struggle. I work 68 hours a week to earn peanuts compared to the guys I went to uni with. I'd much rather work 45 and have more free time. I always thought that I'd come home and do something meaningful for my people and try improve our country. It's become painfully obvious that my line of thinking is just not compatible with the social culture around here. Additionally, I'm not religious and third world country leaders have a way of using that for political points. I'm not savior or the man I thought I would be for my people, and I find myself living in a country I don't belong. It's weird, I've spent my whole life bouncing around countries, but because of my upbringing, education, media consumed and other things, I had never felt more at home when I lived in the UK. My fiancé moved from Pakistan to Ireland when he was 18 to study. He had every intention of going back home and taking over the family business, but he ended up falling in love with the country, its people, its culture, and me. Great country. Moved when I was 14. I was very upset and swore up and down that I would move back home the second I could. Then I grew up. I realized I wanted to do all these things that are impossible in my country, such as 1. Living independently as a single young woman. 2. Go to college. 3. Buy a car. 4. Not be harassed walking down the street. 5. Not fear for my life on a daily basis. That's just some in no special order. Yes, I miss home. Now it's this idealized abstract idea in my head. Reality is far too harsh and not worth risking my life for. I am from India and live in the US now. I grew up upper middle class there and my wife and I do pretty well in the US too, so it wasn't about money. Came here for my masters determined to go back in 2 years. Short answer. Fell in love with the ease of life and value to human life. Example for the former, I didn't need to haggle at shops and deal with crowds anywhere I went. People followed rules. Example for the latter, loved that traffic stopped for school buses. Loved that there was a sign in my neighborhood warning that a blind child lived in the area. I have been living here 13 years now. The immigration system and current politics make me rethink my decision, but it's too late now. I have a life and a child here now. My parents moved from Haiti to Canada 33 years ago, and yeah, that's exactly what my mom thought. But my dad didn't seem too keen on the idea on going back. Fast forward now and they went back a few times, but just for vacation. My mom wants to go back and my dad agrees with her until she gets really serious about it, and then he acts as if the conversation never happened. My parents hates winter with a passion, not as much as me. Nobody can hate winter as much as me. Yet my dad rather spend his time home since he retired than going back to Haiti permanently. In Canada they are middle class, but if my parents sells everything they would easily be millionaire over there. I am an Indian in the US and now I find this country too comfortable. Every goddamn thing in India is a chore. It takes half an hour to travel 3 kilometers in any Indian city. I suppose having 1.3 billion people in a country will do that. Glad you like it here though. I come here from El Salvador almost 10 years ago, when I was 24. I got a job at a butcher shop and was going to work for 5 years and then decide what to do. When I was here 3 years, a lady came to my work every time she shopped. She encouraged me to apply for a green card. I ended up marrying her after I got my green card, and I became a firefighter. There was not any question of staying or leaving. Everything became amazing. Wonderful wife, wonderful job, wonderful life. My grandma emigrated from China in the late 1940s just after the war and worked as a seamstress for a couple years. Her plan was to work for a couple years and gain some managerial experience before returning to her village to take over her father's business. Her family was considered middle class. They owned land, operated a meat packaging business, owned servants, and were pretty financially well off. While she was abroad, the communists took power. One fine day, the local CCP officials marched into her village and confiscated everything her family owned. They seized the deed to their land, kicked them out of their houses, and left them with nothing. She would say that the communists would have done her family a greater mercy had they just executed them. This being the 50s, my grandma didn't find out about this until after she went back. Seeing how she didn't have any further prospects in her homeland, she decided to return to her old job here, and that's where she stayed. Married my grandpa, and had my dad. Same thing happened to my great grandparents too. They owned a ton of land and were rich for the area. Communists came and took everything from them and they died extremely poor. Immigrated to the US from India. I thought I would get my master's degree and then go back. But then I started working. I fell in love with the work culture. Everything is so easy here. People are mostly laid back. Soon enough, I fell in love with a local. Eventually, we got married and now I can't imagine going back. We live in a nice neighborhood. Crime is low here. I drive and can leave at my choice. Again, people are so darn nice. It was almost a cultural shock at first. I come from a state in India which is rife with civil unrest. At one point of time, we were under curfew for 6 months straight. It was hard, but even harder for us girls. I can't imagine that ever happening here. It's a good life and I'm very grateful that I got this choice. I'm the child of immigrants from Mexico. My dad told me that at first he was going to work here for a few years, save up some American dollars and go back to love comfortably. See, the thing is, I was born a year into that idea and changed everything. My dad realized he didn't want to put me into that situation of living in a corrupted and impoverished country. Mexico is an awesome country, don't get me wrong. Different standard of living though. He made a choice to stay in a foreign land for his family. He loves football, Red Robin and peach ice cream now mayo. That last sentence makes me happy, hahaha. Glad to hear he likes it. My situation is reversed, but I'll still give in my 2 cents because I'm annoying like that. I came to the US for high school and college, then worked for a year. I came home, Vietnam, a few months ago. 1 jobs. Super hard to get a work visa in the US if you don't have a STEM degree. 2 lifestyle. I have missed the livelihood of it all. You can see your friends after work 3 or 4 times a week. I believe in work-life balance, but I was always so intense in the US. Always working. Always thinking I need to work more to be like everyone else. I don't enjoy drinking over the weekend, so my hangout options are pretty limited. 3 food. Food in Vietnam is better. No debate. My tummy has been happy. 4 cost of living. It's much cheaper, even taking into consideration of low wages. I have to think twice going to restaurants with my boyfriend in the US, but in Vietnam, I can probably afford to have multiple boyfriends. Maybe one day I'll change my mind again. Who knows? I love both countries and I genuinely think it's unfair to think the US is better than Vietnam based on a few econ metrics. I'm trying to figure out where I want to be, but ultimately, I'll be where I can be the happiest. Hopefully this will bring you a different perspective after reading other comments. Everything should be perfectly balanced, as our savior Thanos would say. 4 cost of living. It's much cheaper, even taking into consideration of low wages. I have to think twice going to restaurants with my boyfriend in the US, but in Vietnam, I can probably afford to have multiple boyfriends. Freaking LOL. I moved to Germany from Pakistan reluctantly to pursue further education. In all honesty, I wanted to go back once I completed my masters, but seeing the peace of mind that was available to me in Germany, as well as knowing there is nothing for me to go back home to, has slowly changed my mind. Well, that and the fact that I actually enjoyed studying and working on my thesis here. Here research isn't a dead-end career, and there are places that offer what I dreamt of doing rather than to just teach and dabble in theoretical side of things. Granted, I still am on a timer if I want to stay here, but I really would like to make it happen. Best of luck and fortitude to you. Speaking as another product of academic brain drain to Germany. My parents at first, one day we will retire, go back and die in our country, Pakistan. Then they retired in England, got a big house built there. Then they always said Pakistan has more freedom and talked like they would still go back. They ended up passing away in England, and since I don't know anyone in Pakistan, they've been buried in England. Who knows, maybe they would have gone back once me and my brothers got old enough to support ourselves, but they passed away young, so never got the chance to. My dad came to the UA from Mexico. He was 1/8 kids. He thought he'd come out to make enough money to go back and help his family, since they were ranchers. He moved to LA and became the first person in his family to graduate high school and second person to graduate college. He decided to stay after getting into college. He's now the wealthiest or all his siblings. Not that, but immigrants who do this because they realize that even though they're working in first world countries making minimal money and living poor lifestyles, they're still living better than they would have lived back home. This is an overgeneralization that isn't necessarily true. My parents thought we'd move back to India after my dad finished his PhD. Too late. 2 kids and we were pretty used to the lifestyle. Sometimes I think about moving back myself, mostly because in the city we were from has become very modernized and living in the deep south has made me kind of jaded. Moved to a first world country when I was 10. Came from Indonesia, which is not even a really bad third world country. I just fell in love with the country and how incredibly progressive society is towards religion. Also helps that I can actually go outside and breathe fresh air. Not as drastic, but I know a lot of Chinese folks in that situation. It mostly comes down to career opportunities and freer internet. Yeah, frick the internet thing. VPN works wonders. It's rather simple. Once you move from a crap place to a nice place where life isn't hard like it was where you're from, you aren't moving back. Here I'll give you examples for migration within the US. After Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans was a crap place. So people moved to Houston and they aren't coming back to the crap place they left. Also, some of those have been redeveloped to a point where they can no longer afford it. Also, farm children, once they go to college, they aren't returning to their parents' farm to all day long for crap pay. Another one is people leaving inner cities. So long they adapt to the suburbia's lifestyle, they aren't returning to the inner cities. I have not immigrated yet, but I have already decided not to come back. Well, when I left my home country, I was quite young, 19. And at that time I was going through a political phase. I thought the ruling government in my country is the evilest thing, and I vowed to myself, of course, that I would go abroad, widen my horizon, and use the things I learned to try to come back and change the situation somehow. The political fervor was burning strong, and I had no doubt back then that I would follow through with that plan. Now, I learned that things are quite a bit more complicated than that there is nothing that can be done to really change the situation. Or at least, I feel so. That I now have a new life here that is worth fighting for more than the idealistic thing back in my country. And in the end, honestly, I got over the phase. Now I would not go back there in any case, but to travel and visit my family. Love the country I live in now more than my home country. I think it is the quality of life, being able to live a better life at decent pay, whereas in third world countries you need to be rich to live a decent lives. In the first world country that changed my mind, and people are more progressive in the West. But at the core, both countries are equally crap. Things like government being corrupt and people being very religious. South Africa to London. I still want to go back one day, but the longer I'm here the less likely it seems I'll ever go back. I'm starting to build a life here. The pound symbol is ridiculous. I can always go back and visit. Most of my old friends have left. I just feel like there's so much more out there now. Hopefully one day I get to move somewhere warmer though. Both my parents are immigrants from Somalia, but my father immigrated to America in the early 90s and met my mum, who lived in New Zealand but was an exchange student in a US university. I talked to them and my mum has been very keen for a while. My dad not so much because it's really unstable. Well, that was until on account of my mum's friends. She went back and her and my siblings have been living in Somalia, coming up to 4 years. The main reason is private education. Both religious and primary secondary school is really effective in Africa. As for my dad, I would just say he's a pessimistic person in general. He's a fun guy, but he's not hopeful about a lot of things, including the situation in Somalia. Funny enough, I am the complete opposite. I just think if I, as the son of 2 Somalis, won't rebuild Somalia, who will? That's my parents' story. My dad came to the US to work and establish contacts here to start a business back home. A year later he called for us to come to the US, originally just to visit and to spend some time in the US. Pretty much as soon as we left our home country, my mom's family betrayed us and sold or took all our stuff. We essentially had no choice but to stay. We didn't have enough money to start over back home, so we were stuck here. It's a complicated story. I'm a US citizen from Mexican parents, so for personal reasons I grew up in Mexico. I've been going back and forth, but I'd spent a total of 4+ years in the US total and the rest in Mexico. I'm 20 years old. Since I grew up in Mexico, my idea was to attend university there, since when I got out of high school that's what all my peers were doing. I got into the #1 university in Mexico, UNAM, and I noticed I didn't like it at all. I started thinking that I should take advantage of my US nationality and that I was losing my time in a third world country where they didn't value my work. Then I changed my mind and thought of going back to uni in Mexico, but I still came here to the US with the idea of working to get some money and spend it at home. What made me change my mind again was that I now see the possibility of restarting my life in here. I want to study architecture and it would be ideal to do it here. I'm a foreigner in my own country, but dang, I love it here. Except the measurement system. That's extremely dumb. I can answer for my parents, who both are third world immigrants to a first world country. Ever since I was a little kid, my parents would always say things like, I'm only here until I retire and once I'm done, I'm going back. I haven't really heard them say this in a while, but it's my mom that holds on to this way of thinking. They've changed their minds because they've lived here for almost 40 years. Whenever they've gone back to their country of origin, They've told me that they feel out of place and that they count the days until it's time to go back. It also helps that they have their sons and their grandchildren here. My family is Vietnamese. We all came here in '94, and as far as my grandpa is concerned, he doesn't have a country to return to anymore because the communists won the war. A lot of Lebanese moved to Australia during the wars in the 70s 80s. When things settled down a while back, a lot of them went home but kept their US passports. When the crap hit the fan in Lebanon a few years ago, there were heaps of them trying to get the government to evacuate them. I just checked and it was 2006. Guess where they were evacuated to? Syria. How the world has changed. I was born and raised in Indonesia but moved to the US while I was still in school. Originally I planned to return to Indonesia as soon as I finished my undergrad since I didn't want to be far from my family. But then I met my so and all the amazing friends and people who supported me here. I realized that even if I am technically considered foreigner in this country, I've never been treated as such and has always, for the most part, feel welcomed. I got used to the way of life. Eventually I changed my mind and am now working towards staying here. Basically I felt like I was home and belonged here, so I decided to stay. I wanted to study in the US, get BS then PhD maybe. I still haven't finished them, but I know I don't want to go back. Nothing is left for me back home. Friends have changed, no activities to do back home that I can't do here. Food is fine everywhere really. The only thing left for me back home is my mom and siblings, but my abusive dad is still there, so even that is not worth staying for. I always believed that home is where my heart is. I still don't know where my journey will take me, but it is definitely not to my old home. Moved from somewhere in Asia to the US 3 years ago. I'm lucky enough that I don't have any issues with visa and stuff like that since I'm a US citizen. It was my intention to just try it out here after my college graduation and work for a bit then go home at some point. But living in a first world country is so much different and comfortable that I'd rather just live here for good. Sometimes their employers hold their passports so they just kinda stay and work forever. But that doesn't happen all the time or everywhere. It just happens frequently in Middle East first world countries and probably more in non-first world countries. My sister and I were sent here to go to school. Then we were supposed to come back on holidays, and after our education was finished, we were 10 and 12. Dad left mom however for another woman, and mom had just enough money to come to America. We scraped along and mom almost got deported, but we managed to stay. We didn't have enough money to go back until I was an adult. I miss lots of things about home, but we were so lucky to have landed here. My mom came on a vacation to the US from Mexico, and my dad came to buy rims in the US. They met while in the US. She got pregnant, and now they still live here and have 2 kids in college including myself. My dad was one. Although he first went to the Middle East, worked there for like 20 or so years before moving back from the US. We came back after 9/11 with the Patriotic Act, the layoffs, and the inherent hate against Muslims. Finished my high school and college in my home country, and honestly, it's not that bad. I understand why our neighbors started getting afraid, why folks refused to rent us apartments or let us stay at their place, why people from my own country wanted to exploit that and make us work longer hours and pay more than what they charged other tenants at their basements. I'd seen more or less of that back in the Mideast anyway. They say the first world is a free world. I say it depends on which part of the socio-economic racial ethnic group you end up in. LOL. If you're Bangladeshi, Bangladesh is 1,000 times more free than the US of A. Whites are evil. Came to Ireland to find myself. Ended up finding my husband and started my family, and have enjoyed everything about my new life. It may not be a poor country I come from, USA, but I found myself broke, exhausted, financially struggling, and living back at home with my mom after working non-stop from 16 years on. I was working 2 jobs, providing home care on the side, and going to school to finish a degree whose entire program was cancelled later that year. I essentially had a breakthrough moment while talking to my sister. Sold all of my non-essential belongings, took advantage of an early cashier on my 401k and bought my ticket to go abroad. It's the single best decision I have ever made. Plus, Ireland, its people, the culture, they are absolutely incredible. I'm the opposite. I'm getting uncomfortable with the amount of nationalism and xenophobia in the US, and if I complain, I am told to go back to my country. I'm native to the US and I am also uncomfortable with the nationalism and xenophobia. Not me, but my parents. They moved from Thailand to the US 25 plus years ago or something. My dad never intended on staying, but he met my mom and the rest is history. Maybe it's hard to admit, but once we connect everybody online, migration is gonna become a real problem unless we find a way to be productive as heck to incorporate such a huge population, i.e. by our side. Me. I don't know if you consider it a third world country, but I moved to America from Bangladesh when I was like 7 or 8 years old. 19 now, and I realized I don't want to do it just because I have a lot of friends here and I'm really happy. I go to a university I love, and while I love my country, I realize that I've been gone for so long that I'm out of touch with the culture. My parents gave up teaching me how to read Bangla, so I can barely read it or understand how to say numbers. Although I speak it very well, lol. It's just a cultural thing. The only friends I have back in Bangladesh are my family friends' children who I barely talk to. Again, I love my country, but I don't want to give up basically everything I know and have to start all over again a second time. It seems like all the answers value the aspect of first world countries where people follow the rules. It kind of gives me hope that the third world countries could be improved if somehow everyone, including politicians and police, followed the rules. It also makes me worried about the impact of increasing corruption in first world countries. Naive but hopeful. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.